titled America's Disaster Response, the Army's Preparedness for a Complex Catastrophe. I'm one of AUSA's senior fellows, as well as a member of the Council of Trustees. As your professional association, the Association of United States Army and the Institute of Land Warfare is proud to provide forums like this one throughout the year that broaden the knowledge base of Army professionals and those who support our Army. This is one of 10 AUSA ILW professional development seminars that have been conducted over the past 3 days. AUSA will amplify the U.S. Army's narrative to audiences inside the Army and help to further the association's mission to be the voice for the Army and support for the soldier. Of course, we cannot do this alone. AUSA relies on its members to help tell the Army story and to support our soldiers and their families. A strong membership base is vitally important for our advocacy efforts in Congress, the Pentagon, and the Defense Industrial Base, and to the public in communities across the country and the world through AUSA's 121 local chapters. If you're an AUSA member, please stand if you are able, and let's give these members a round of applause. For those of you Army professionals that are not yet members of your professional association, we encourage you to join AUSA by either going down to the membership booth downstairs, go online, or download the AUSA app, and you'll have it on your phone for all great things, including the agenda this year. So thank you for your time, and now I will turn the floor over to Lieutenant General Retired Honoré, the former Commanding General of United States First Army. Sir.
Thank you. Well, thank all of you for coming today. We've got a big challenge on our hand. It's right after lunch. And the only thing between you and another cocktail party is this event. But thank you for coming. It's a serious topic because as we live in this great country and in this world, we are being challenged by Mother Nature and by the force of those who wish to do evil. And then sometimes it's just accidents that happen that put our nation at risk. And for this mission, our Army, one of our first tasks is to defend under DOD the people of the United States, its territories, and its allies. And under that comes this mission of military support to civil authorities. Now, I have a mission here to make sure, a self-imposed mission, that I say unity of effort as many times as I can. And I don't know how in the hell I'm gonna get the multi-domain operations in here, but I understand that's a new buzzword that we've got to have in every briefing slide. And I sure can't miss Mission Command. So y'all help me with that when you ask your questions. If you can help us integrate those, because we need to make sure we, in detail, have a mutual understanding of this unity of effort, because that's one of the outcomes. Now, all of you can think in your own mind major events that happened in the history of your life where the Department of Defense and the Army work with state and federal partners to respond. Again, our first mission is to defend the people of the United States, whether it's man-made or natural disasters. There's the term of reference that is used in the Department of Homeland Security and the FEMA language is catastrophic incident. When we look at the Department of Defense, that language is complex catastrophes. We're synchronized. We both know what we're doing. But you have to understand the DHS language is primarily written around the national incident format that is used to synchronize activities across the government, and that's primarily focused on the United States, whereas the Department of Defense have responded and continue to respond to incidents around the world through the State Department. and USAID, as we saw with the case in Bermuda and as well as in Fukushima in Japan, with unique capacities to provide and help save lives. So while the definitions sound different, they are more similar than they are. There's no seam there, and we take our missions from the Department of Defense in collaboration with, and much of the discussions today will be centered or could be centered around what is happening in the mainland United States and in the territories, for which we've had a lot of activities in the last few years. We look at the series of hurricanes that have gone back to that required all of government, as well as if you look at back one, we all remember 9/11, that an entire government response. With that, I'd like to start off again with that concept of unity of effort. And I'd like to start with one of my mentors, Mr. Damon Penn, from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Damon, would you lead off with your introduction as well as your key points? So.
Yes, sir. Thank you, and thank you, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Let me start by restating the obvious and remind you that all disasters are locally executed, state managed, and federally supported. And the reason that's important is it's that the state managed part. And when I was in uniform, I really didn't have a grasp of the whole concept of the governor being in charge, because we're DOD. We're in charge of everything. We got all the stuff, and everybody wants all the stuff. But I've really come to appreciate after time has passed and getting more experience how tough it is for governors to manage disasters and what role they have to play in the whole management process. And then our focus, and my focus in particular in response at FEMA, is to meet any shortcomings or meet any shortages that the governor has in executing his or her plan. So the reason I kind of stay with the governor is they have some tough decisions to make. If you think about this last storm we had, Dorian, and as it worked its way up the coast, one of the questions was, well, my gosh, why doesn't the governor evacuate the coast? And you name the governor, you name the coast. Well, it's a 4-day weekend. 4-day weekend means that there are tourists along the coast. If the governor evacuates the coast and we don't have a storm, the governor's in trouble. If the governor doesn't evacuate the coast and you have a storm, the governor's in trouble. Tough place for the governor to be. So just one thing to leave you with as we start is that remember that the governor makes the decisions because the government has to pay. And normally a governor has a 25% cost share or greater that he pays of whatever the federal response is. So when you think back about how much it costs to operate a helicopter, when you think about how much it costs to deploy troops, 25% of that comes back to the governor. But I really want to focus on catastrophic incidents, as General Honore just described, because we have not had a catastrophic incident. Katrina was big. Katrina was complex. Katrina was not catastrophic. Think about a couple of scenarios like we have with Cascadia and New Madrid, where you have 100,000 casualties. You have 250,000 people now that are directly affected, and you have 1 million people that need some help of some kind. That is big. So when I did the math for this, I just did the math to see how many doctors it would take to serve a community that size. And if you take every doctor we have in the United States right now, and they do nothing but respond to an incident of that size, we still don't have enough doctors. So think about that as we talk about a catastrophe and how big it is. Also think about, with a catastrophe, how you just can't do more of something. You know, we're used to if one is good, two must be better. Well, sooner or later, you're going to run out of, you're going to get to 10 and you're going to run out. So you have to have a different idea of going in. So I view a catastrophic incident as managing shortages. So instead of managing resources now, I think our job becomes to manage shortages. And something I learned from the Army is, and that boils down to an appropriation of assets. And how you tell the state and how you tell the FEMA region, this is what you got, figure it out. Because you can ask for as many helicopters as you want, sooner or later there are no more helicopters available. You can ask for as many medical care people as you want, sooner or not people aren't available. And then also think kind of in terms of what things look like on the ground because they're much different. Think about three groups of people. Think about the people that we normally associate with the disaster that we respond to. Think about the other group of people that are on the other coast watching it on TV. And think about this huge group of people in the middle that have some capability to take care of themselves and neighbors but need some kind of direction on what to do. And a quick example I use is during the Atlanta ice storms several years ago, there was a lady that went around all the emergency managers in Atlanta and asked, how can I help? And everybody was too busy for her. So she went home and she got on the internet, and overnight she got something like 20,000 volunteers that all wanted to help, that all could provide something. And they took food out to stranded motorists, they took water, and they took heat, all the things that people needed while they were stranded. She organized that on a PC at home at night. So think about that big group in the middle and what we do with them. And we can talk about them later if you'd like to. And then think, too, of talking about things are not going to return to normal when we talk about a catastrophic incident. So think about places that not only won't get power for a year, but may never get power again. Think about communities now that are going to displace. And that's the biggest fear of a governor is if a community or part of a community displaces, how do you get it back? And that community serves some function in the whole big scheme of things. They produce something, they do something. How do you get that capability back? So just some things to think about as we work our way through. Sir, I'll turn it back to you.
You want me to just go?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks, General Honore. Hey, my name is Bob Salis, and I'm on the OSD staff. Let me start by saying thank you for your service, all of you that are currently serving and those that have served in whatever capacity. We really appreciate that. As Damon talked about, and General Honore very quickly, we've had a number of events over the last couple of years. Pretty significant events, right? Sandy, and then, of course, Maria, two really big events that the department performed superbly at. You know, if you look at those populations out in Puerto Rico, it's 3.5 million people affected. In New Jersey and New York during Sandy, it was about 8 million people. But that's still not a catastrophic event, and I stick with Damon's theme about that. But tremendous amount of capability the Department of Defense provided in both of those events. In Maria, it was about 60,000 military people from the total force. U.S. Transcom flew over 3,000 sorties in about 60-plus days. DLA delivered tens of millions of meals. Just if you went through what the Defense Department did in that effort, it's phenomenal, both in Sandy and both in Maria, and tremendous. But as we talk about catastrophic events, they can come in different types. We focus a lot on natural disasters, and we talked about Cascadia subduction zone and New Madrid and those kinds of things. But we also got to think about nation-state challenges and the evolving geopolitical environment that we're in, and how we'd be able to execute all the responsibilities of the Defense Department, to include responding to these kinds of events at home. And as we try to characterize a catastrophic event, to me, it's things that we haven't dealt with in the country: mass casualties, mass sheltering, mass evacuation in the tens of millions. And how would we perform those functions well as federal, state, and local authorities? So as we think through that today, I think there's a great opportunity to talk a little bit about that. But again, the Defense Department has fully embraced its DSCA responsibilities, Defense Support of Civil Authorities. And I know for a fact that as we have events in this country, there are significant expectations and demands on the Defense Department. And again, across the Defense Department. And it has been done exceedingly well over the years. Several years ago, we had an initiative in the Defense Department. It's called the Complex Catastrophe Initiative. It was focused on improving planning, better using DoD capabilities, leveraging the total force, enhancing organizational effectiveness, and then improving doctrine training and exercising. And we went through a pretty rigorous process to improve the way that we did business. But there's always room to improve. And so as we look at a complex catastrophe, we're going to need to maximize all the capabilities of the department at that time. So it'll be total force: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, active reserve, and guard. And if you look at the capabilities that are required from the Defense Department, it involves a lot of organizations. We have the Corps of Engineers, General Simonite up here. They do incredible work. But there's also organizations like DLA that really provides the backbone of logistics support for a lot of these operations. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Transcom, significant organizations. And you shouldn't overlook installations. Installations play a critical role in this effort, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And although we've made great strides, again, there's opportunity for improvement. I think the other thing that has to be recognized right off the bat when we talk about these kinds of activities, even a complex catastrophe, we operate under a federalist system of government. What does that mean? Local state authorities, gubernatorial authority, and then federal authority. And within the federal departments and agencies, who has responsibility? I won't go through all the details of that, but I think it's very important to recognize that. And I also think it's important to recognize, as you look at our federal partners, we have tremendous federal partners out there, whether it's DOT, DOE, HHS, and you all know what those acronyms stand for, I know. But bottom line is, these are great organizations. But for the most part, they're regulatory organizations. There's no operational capability in the Department of Transportation to deal with transportation challenge. However, they're significantly helpful with the regulations in these kinds of events and modifying regulations and lessening some of those challenges so that we can move quickly across lines. DOE, tremendous organization. How do they support? Really corralling the private sector to do that. And of course, General Semonite can talk about all the great things that he did in Puerto Rico, and I see Ed out there too. It's great to see it. Bottom line is, it's a federalist system. So understanding that. It's also systems within systems, as I just spoke about those federal departments and agencies. Think about an organization like HHS, tremendous organization. They're responsible for the medical capabilities in a mass casualty. They're going to reach out to public health, which is a great organization, but not a lot of capability to deal with something like a mass casualty event. So it's going to be incumbent upon the Defense Department and our medical capabilities. And you think back to Puerto Rico just 2 years ago when we had the comfort in 5 field hospitals on the ground in Puerto Rico. A catastrophic event is going to tax all of us. So it's really important that we work together closely. So within those systems of systems in our federalist system, it's also based on a transactional process. Everybody deals with transactional processes, right? The challenge with that, it's a request for assistance. It comes from the lowest level, from the local level to the state, from the state to our integrated regional aspects, and then, of course, the FEMA. Now, of course, we've done some things to work around that with top-down mission assignments, knowing that in an event like this, we're going to be working very closely, and as General Honore pointed out a few minutes ago with unity of effort, it is going to be very important that we're all working together. But based on transactions like that, we have to find ways to be more expeditious and capable in identifying the requirements that are necessary. So really complex operating environment from the local, state, federal level, and how the Defense Department fits into all those different systems in the transactional process. So for me, I've identified basically 5 critical challenges. I think it's 5. I am the only Marine on the panel, so I just checked my math here. But we do have 5 critical challenges that I think impact response. The first one is coordinating assessments. That to me is critical because understanding key areas of need and the types of need is really important. And you think about the geographic dispersal and the ability to do that. Second is gaining situational awareness. That's imperative in this. It's matching the need to the capabilities and making timely decisions. The third is priorities, competing priorities. It's going to be priorities at multiple levels in a catastrophic event, whether that's at multiple counties within a state, multiple states within a region, federal entities, our ESF partners in the National Response System, and trying to reconcile all of those. Next, of course, is the requirements generation process that I talked to. It's the ability, it's a linear process. We have to have a means to do it faster, and I think we've got some solutions to that. And then next is identifying key leadership, critical to an area that I think is so important. And as you think about the federalist system, it's important that we have those partnerships at every level and do that. So as I look at those 5 areas, challenge areas, I also looked at what I consider enduring actions to maximize the effectiveness especially in the complex operating environment. The first one, it's a no-brainer. You hear it every time you're with somebody about these issues. It's building partnerships. But to me, it's not just building the partnerships, it's sustaining the partnerships. That's the key to everything. It's sustaining partnerships. Damon and I are brothers. We spend a lot of time together. Anytime he needs something, he knows he can call me. Anytime I need anything, I know I can call him and I can get him instantaneously. And it's just critical to sustain those partnerships. It's really what keeps things moving in the process. And again, at multiple different levels, the Department of Defense has built tremendous partnerships throughout the spectrum. Joint Force Headquarters State, Defense Coordinator, the Dual Status Commanders, the DCOs, and you'll hear more about all of that, I'm sure. But it's important that we maintain those relationships across those functional entities, too. Next is expanding our information sharing networks. And that's the key operative word, expanding it. It's the ability, the speed of information is based on trust. And when you think about that complex network, it's critical that we're able to share information quickly. It allows us to prioritize and make big decisions. The next thing is having pre-identified capabilities and pre-arranged agreements. And very simply working through that, it's the EMAC process at the state level. It's our DoD installations with their mutual aid agreements and their immediate response authority. It's the work that we've done over the years to improve the pre-scripted mission assignments and the XORDs that establish the forces and posture of the forces, whether those forces are to respond to a DISC event or our CBRN response force, which is on standby. 18,000 military personnel on standby every day in this nation because of these kinds of challenges that presented. And then it's organizations like DLA that actually have interagency agreements. The next one is the investments in preparedness that we make. That is so important to everything we do. It's the planning, training, and exercise. That's what preparedness means to me. But it also starts at the individual level and the organizational level. And recently in the department, the Secretary signed out an emergency preparedness pamphlet. I'll be glad to give anybody that information, but I think it's critical for all the unit commanders. And last thing I'll say is strategic communications. What we do in the communications realm as it relates to disasters, but in particular big disasters. Communicating to the public and knowing FEMA, having participated in many press events of the FEMA team, it's so important that the American people know what we're doing, those affected in the community know what we're doing. It's also important that our constituents on the Hill and the members on the Hill, congressional members know what's going on, and that we're working closely with the governors of the affected states. It's really important. In my view, there's a lot of capabilities in the United States of America, whether that's private sector or it's government capabilities, state and local sector capabilities. The challenge really, in my view, is how we prepare ourselves, how we coordinate better, how we integrate our efforts through pre-planning and those kinds of activities. In my view, that's what will make us more effective in a catastrophic event. So I thank you for your time. And again, thank you for your service.
Okay, I'm Lieutenant General Laura Richardson. I'm the commander of Army North, and Army North and 5th Army. And for those of you who don't know where we're located, at San Antonio, Texas, at the very historic Fort Sam Houston installation. And specifically our command and where we fit in all of this is we're the land component command for things of this nature that occurs. And so it's my pleasure to be here on the panel and have such an august panel here with all the panel members and everybody that's here. So I want to give a thank you to them for being here and recognizing the importance of this panel and the discussion and your questions and answers that we're going to have after that. But what I want to do is specifically talk about what Army North does and kind of how we fit in this framework that's been established over the probably close to 2 decades. Because I think that that's been some very important change that's occurred. Homeland Defense is our #1 priority, as it is for my higher headquarters, which is the U.S. Northern Command, based out of Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. But while Homeland Defense drives much of our planning and coordinating efforts, Army North is also responsible for providing defense support of civil authorities and conducting theater security cooperation with the armies of Mexico and Canada. We serve as the nation's theater army at Army North, filling both the Army Service Component Command role as well as being designated NORTHCOM's standing JFLC, Joint Force Land Component Command. And in this role, we are one of the busiest service component commands. We don't just talk about being a JFLC, we actually do it daily in multiple ways. And for example, right now we're the standing JFLC for land operations supporting Homeland Defense. We're also the JFLC for the Title X support DoD is providing DHS on the southwest border, and this support will continue through September of 2020. During the recent Hurricane Dorian, we served as the JFLC for Title X forces and capabilities requested by FEMA, and also supported the foreign disaster response to the Bahamas. We also provided Title X command and control and forces to 2 national security special events in the last couple of months, including support to POTUS and 180 world leaders participating in the 74th UN General Assembly in New York City, and also the 24th World Scout Jamboree, which is really an honor because it's been since 1967 since the U.S. has hosted the World Scout Jamboree. In our theater army capacity, we set the conditions for operational and tactical convergence of land-based capabilities across all domains in order to deter and defeat adversaries and defend the homeland. There are a number of key functions we perform as both a JFLC and an ASCC. As a JFLC, we receive and prepare forces and oversee mission execution. As an ASCC, we set the theater by assessing threats, conducting specialized training and exercises, providing communications, and providing sustainment to land forces. We set the theater in both our roles, supporting DISCA and Homeland Defense, just a bit differently. The Army has assigned and allocated forces that Bob mentioned that enable us to accomplish both of these missions. We have an aviation brigade, an air and missile defense brigade, engineers, medical, military, police, CBRN, response forces, sustainment, military intelligence, and signal forces. Our headquarters also has 4 deployable command and control packages, allowing us to provide support to multiple complex events, or one large event, such as the New Madrid Fault, which could potentially involve multiple state responses. Moving from natural disasters to those that are man-made, Army North is also responsible for the training and certification of the 18,000 men and women who are in the DoD CBRN response enterprise. This includes state and regional CBRN response forces who can deploy within 3 to 12 hours and would remain under the governor's control. On the federal side, we have OPCON, or Operational Control, of Joint Task Force Civil Support, a 2-star Joint Force headquarters, which commands the Defense CBRN Response Force, and JTFCS commanders in the front row, Major General Bill Hall. So if you have questions for him, he's here and would be happy to answer them. The DSERF can deploy within 24 to 48 hours and provides technical search and rescue, mass casualty decontamination, medical, aviation, communications, engineering, and logistics in support of the lead federal agency. Our federal CBRN response forces also include 2 additional reserve component CBRN command and control elements that are prepared to deploy within 96 hours. The final core capability, and what I call the tip of the spear in our operations for DISCA, is our Defense Coordinating Officers, or our DCOs. As ARNOR stood up and achieved initial operation capability in 2005, we created 10 full-time DCO positions, all of them coded to be a former brigade commander, and each co-located with one of the 10 FEMA regional headquarters. Every DCO has a team of 9 personnel that makes up the defense coordinating element. And these DCEs coordinate federal and military response, and integrate federal military disaster response plans with state and regional partners to improve readiness for any contingency. These teams have built relationships and shared understanding with not only the FEMA region personnel, but also with state emergency managers and responders within the region. And also during a disaster, in addition to their organic team of 9, each DCE is augmented with a number of personnel from my headquarters and also have operational control of a number of regional and state emergency preparedness liaison officers, or what we call EPLOs. These EPLOs are senior level reserve members of the Armed Forces and the U.S. Coast Guard who provide critical liaison with their respective states, regions, as well as the National Guard and any established state JTF. They also provide the DCE knowledge of service capabilities in response to requests for assistance. Through recent responses over the past 3 years and close coordination with our Army Reserve and National Guard partners, we have honed our processes and procedures to quickly integrate DoD Title X capabilities in support of the lead federal agency to ensure unity of effort and not being late to need. So I look forward to your questions, and thanks again for attending the panel today. And I'll be followed by Lieutenant General Todd Simonite.
Thanks, Laura. So I am the Chief of Engineers, and I'm also the Commanding General of an organization called the United States Army Corps of Engineers. And today I'll give you a little bit of an oversight as to what we do and how we continue to step up for disaster response. Our organization has 35,000 civilians and 800 military. The military are 9 general officers, command sergeant majors, and 43 brigade commanders. We call them districts, but that's the command and control from mission command. That's the ethic to be able to get the mission done. The 35,000 civilians give all of the repository engineer capabilities we would need to be able to do these missions. And again, all different aspects we do. We do about a $58 billion program a year. Obviously, installations. We do all nation's waters. I'm going to talk you through on the disasters on the waterways. And we work also, we have the authority to work for the interagency and do a lot of construction for the rest of the interagency. So there's 3 real aspects that we actually work, and I'm going to walk you through those as to how we support disasters. First of all, as a DoD element, if the Secretary of Defense decides they need some capability down on the ground, Tyndall Air Force Base is a great example. When the storm hit Tyndall, the authorities that have to be done inside of Tyndall are very different than what would have to be done outside in support of FEMA. So we then we activate our teams. We have a contract management. We'll bring contractors in. All of our contracts are pre-storm, so therefore we go in and work side by side, whatever the service is, if it's Cherry Point, if it's Matsu, to be able to continue to take care of DoD installations. And it's not just response, but also when it comes to things like sea level rise, what are we worried about on installations that could be affected by disasters? How do we do planning and real estate actions there? The second big mission is a direct linkage to FEMA. FEMA doesn't want to go through the bureaucracy of working through the chain of command in DoD, so we are a direct report to FEMA when it comes to storms, and I'll walk you through that on the next slide. And then the third thing is very unknown, but this is a very, very specific authority we have with respect to the Rivers and Harbors Act of how we run the nation's waterways. So if you look on the slide here, we'll show you a couple pictures. Basically, this is the missions we do for FEMA. We do 6 doctrinal missions. It's like a battle drill. It's all on the shelf. We know exactly how to respond. We have contracts all around the United States to be able to do these 6 doctrinal missions. And we continue to be able to make sure that the teams are ready to go. We have 28 trained teams. As you think through some of these ones, upper left is temporary generators. Most of the big cities will have power go out, so we have contractors that come in, put the generators in place. If it's a big hospital, to be able to make sure that we can keep electricity up and running. Just below that is urban search and rescue. How do we continue to provide support to state and local officials for that type of capability? And then in the middle on the upper side is debris removal. If a hurricane comes through and completely devastates a neighborhood, and we're talking 1,000 houses completely taken to the ground, then we come back in and with our contractors, we sort it all. So where does tree removal go? Where does old refrigerators? What about mattresses? What about hazardous waste? How does all that go away? So the occupants just have to take it to the street, and then we pull it away. We work for FEMA. FEMA gives us a mission assignment, and they transfer funds to us. We're a reimbursable agency, so we bring our elements in to be able to take care of that. On the upper right, you'll see this is infrastructure. If there is some buildings that are damaged, fire stations, sewer stations, something we need to do to come in with contractors to get a town up and running. We provide some degree of temporary infrastructure. And then in the middle bottom, blue roofs. There's a lot of times where these storms will come in. The house will actually be structurally in integrity, but the roof will be damaged. So we come in with contractors, put on blue plastic. Puerto Rico, we did 5,000 roofs. Sometimes, unfortunately, they don't have insurance. That roof could stay on there for 3 or 4 years, but that roof, done with the blue tarp, is allowed the rest of that house to be able to not get damaged. And then infrastructure assessment. Right after a storm, are my bridges okay? So we work very closely with our civil engineers. A lot of this is tele-engineering. We have cameras. We go down underneath things. We look at it, and we give the assessments back to the locals where possible. The thing that I'm not going to go in a lot of detail today, but we're mainly talking response. Most of the time, that is all funded by FEMA. There's another whole different phase, which is really the rebuilding phase, and then Congress could apply supplementals to come back in. So in 2018, we got $17.4 billion to come back in after Harvey, Irma, and Maria and build more resiliency back into those neighborhoods, stronger levees, stronger grids to be able to make sure that they're protected. We're in the process right now of building that $17.4 billion. 19 hit, and we had Michael and Florence, we had California wildfires, another $3.3 billion supplemental. So we're mainly talking about the response, but don't forget, just when we're done, the people on this stage are done, these communities continue to be devastated, and Congress continues to step up and be able to apply that money. Let's go to the next one real quick. So here's a couple different pictures, and if you look in the lower left, the orange colors there are kind of what we do for FEMA. I'm going to kind of walk you around just to kind of give you an array of some of the kind of missions we do. And then on the lower right, it talks about this other authority we have. So a good example, we do rivers for the federal government. You think of it, the Mississippi, the Missouri. This year is the second wettest year in the last 124 years. There are still rivers that are flooded right now that have been flooded for 2 or 3 different months. You might not see it here on the East Coast, but if you're the Midwest right now, you've been devastated by the Arkansas River, the Mississippi, the Missouri River. We continue to manage the water. We have 715 different structures. Just think of a river with like 15 big reservoirs, almost like 15 bathtubs in a row. So when the water comes out of Canada, how do we slowly continue to watch? Where are those storms coming? How much can our reservoirs absorb? And then how much do we let out? The more water we let out, we risk flooding people downstream. However, we've got to continue to build capacity in that for other storms that could come. And so we've been doing this for 244 years. We've got a pretty good understanding of how to be able to operate those rivers. But it goes back to talking to local people on levee safety. How do you do integrated water management? How can we continue to be able to do that? We do that under our own authority that was given us to Congress. But it's very important we talk to FEMA all the time because they're going to have ramifications on flood insurance. If there's DOD issues, we keep coming in. So just kind of walking, I'm going to start in the upper right there. Some different kind of things that we do, and again, it's a lot of time working side by side with the people on the panel here. Levee integrity, to be able to make sure the levees are good in West Virginia. Florence hit down in South Carolina. You'll see a picture there of our communications equipment. We have standalone stuff, great big gigantic ops centers, about like 18-wheelers that we can be able to put out there. So if we aren't necessarily, have the right kind of comms up and running, we normally send our comm stuff in the day before the storm. We try to get all of our people set. Even in Puerto Rico, we flew in about 74 people before the hurricane hit, so we were there with comms embedded in. Flood fighting in Florence, South Carolina. Matsu. Matsu is a DOD facility that ships ammunition to Europe. It's a great big kind of a train terminal down in South Carolina. Matsu got devastated when the storm came through. It's DOD installation, so we came back in under the Corps of Engineers with contracts. But here's the unique thing, especially for those of you that are in the military out there. Here, General Richardson had on the PDTO, in other words, the on-hand forces that we could deploy, she had an engineer battalion at Fort Bragg. So we brought civilian contractors to come in to do rail repair and to rebuild wharfs. We also brought in an active duty engineer battalion, put them underneath the Corps of Engineer District to be able to rebuild that capability. So again, there's a lot of ways that, how do you find synergy to be able to lean on all the capabilities we have to make this happen? Temporary housing in Irma, temporary power in Puerto Rico. The Department of Energy does grid repair. We do temporary generators, but on the 8th day, it was determined that they could not get mutual aid, in other words, a lot of states, to be able to bring in all the small trucks to be able to rebuild the grid. So we took a task, it took us 8 months, but we put in 62,000 power poles to be able to rebuild the grid in Puerto Rico. Dam modification, we had a dam in Puerto Rico that was a private dam that failed, temporary roofing, infrastructure assessment, a lot of generators in Typhoon U2 that we brought in, a lot of debris management, the California wildfires. You don't think about that much here, but massive wildfires went through and burned not only all these neighborhoods, but it burned all the forests. About 2 weeks later, it rained, where normally that vegetation would slow that water down. That vegetation was gone. Now all of those mudslides came down and continued to devastate those neighborhoods. And then finally, urban search and rescue. So just kind of the things that the Corps does. Let's go to the last slide. So this last slide I kind of call the wheel of misfortune. And this is 2018, okay? And if you look on that slide all the way around, these are actual storms or different events, 52 different events. The Corps deployed 2,100 people to this. It was about $5.5 billion. So I'm going to end on just a couple themes here. And several of the other speakers talked about a catastrophic catastrophe in a disaster. A good organization can do any one storm and to be able to handle it. The challenge that we saw in 2018 and all of us was Matthew came in and really hit, Harvey hit Texas really, really bad. It was only about 10 days later that all of a sudden Irma came in, whacked the Virgin Islands, jumped over Puerto Rico, and hit Florida. So while we're fully engaged in Texas, we're trying to make sure we got our teams figuring out where's the storm going to go. And don't forget, you never know where it's going to hit and where it's not. 10 days later, Maria came in and whacked Puerto Rico. So then you take that, combine it with all the other things. That's what, by just the complexity of all the events and all the teams having to figure out how to do this, where it can get to be pretty hard and you really have to step up. So 3 things I'd leave you with that all of us have to think about in disasters: pre-event training and planning. The more you can do before the storm, the better you're going to be. We do it. I have a whole battalion. It's called the 249th Engineer Battalion. These are brilliant electricians. If they've got a week off in the middle of the summer, we send them to a city. Miami's a great example. We go to see the mayor of Miami. We say, what are your 50 most challenged areas if you're going to have a storm on electricity? And they'll say, hospital number 5 is my number 1 priority for electricity in the storm. So we take the electricians down to hospital number 5. We go in the back. All these buildings are wired for temporary generators. We look and say, we need 3 Caterpillar 309 generators right there. We write a contract right there for 3 Caterpillar 309 generators. We go down to Caterpillar, we give them a contract, and we say, when we call you and say go, you just go. You just get ready to go. So all of those things are on contracts already. And again, we do the top 50, then the next couple of weeks we'll go to another city. So the more that all of us, whatever our area is, can think ahead of the storm, have the plans on the shelf, and to be able to make sure we can execute them ruthlessly, it's a good way to go. The second one is relationships. Bob talked about it, partnerships, relationships. You have got to have the relationship long before the storm. And that's where all of us work side by side every single day. It's not at the senior level, but it's down on the ground. So how do we make sure that we're working with the Coast Guard? How do we make sure we know the local mayors? What's the emergency response plan? How do all these things seamlessly fit together? That relationship is invaluable when you're in the middle of the storm. And then the last one is this aggressive execution. The bureaucracy is going to just haunt you during these storms. Every time you turn around, somebody's going to say no. Somebody's going to say you don't have that authority. Some lawyer's going to say you can't do this. And you've got to figure out how to stay within the law, stay within your authorities, continue to let local people do the work, states do the work, and when needed, we come in and do it. But you've got to put your head down and break through the BS, or you'll never be able to do what we need to do as a federal agency. So with that, I'll end it right there and pass to General Hamilton.
Hey, sir, thanks. I'm Pat Hamilton. I'm the commander of the 36th Infantry Division, Texas National Guard. And I'm at a disadvantage up here. My big challenge is I'm the lowest ranking guy on the stage, but I'm from Texas, so I got it. Before I came to the division 18 months ago, for the 4.5 years before that, I was the director of the Joint Staff for the Adjutant General of Texas, responsible for coordinating and executing domestic response support to the governor of Texas and the Division of Emergency Management in the state of Texas. Wildfires, floods, winter storms, hurricanes, border security operations, which is no small task that we're still doing, and I developed a great relationship with Bob Salas is down there, and then counter-drug operations. So it was a lot to say grace over. Texas does anywhere from 30 to 50,000 man-days of domestic response every year. And what I want to go over real quickly is let's get left of the catastrophic event and look at what does the National Guard do within the states prior to that catastrophic event to be prepared to get to that. First of all, the Guard is the professional domestic DOD first responders for anything that happens in the state. That's our job. The Adjutant General is held accountable by the governor for that role. And that's a lot to say grace over, and a lot of people don't really understand that relationship. And so some Guard considerations for all hazards response, because understand the state's emergency management system, however they have it organized and developed, tries to follow, in most cases, to get federal funding, tries to follow the National Incident Management System, the National Response Framework. And so it's really behooves us as the Guard to understand that system and train our soldiers on that, our leaders on that, so that when we integrate with the state's Division of Emergency Management, we know how they're operating. It's not vastly different than what we do in the military for Mission Command, but it will absolutely support unity of effort when we show up to support those local first responders. I'll tell you, it's not a successful thing to roll in if you're an infantry platoon leader and think that you're in charge of something at the local level when that county judge looks at you and says, no, son, you're going to do it this way. It's not a good thing to say, no, I'm an infantry platoon leader, this is how we do it. He'll send you back, I promise. So in Texas, and a lot of other states have started doing this, they've developed what they call mission-ready packages. My comment about an infantry unit kind of applies. During Hurricane Rita and before, I guess, before Katrina really, the states didn't really have it figured out yet what the military could do for them. And so they would start asking for stuff. They didn't really know how much stuff, they just wanted stuff. A guy named Jack Colley was the director of emergency management in Texas in those days, and he was a former brigade commander in 1st Cav Division, pretty aggressive guy. And he would call and say, I need 22 trucks. Well, sir, what do you need them to do? Well, no, just shut up, Colonel. I need 22 trucks. And so we started negotiating with them and came up with this process to determine, based on the gaps that they had in the emergency support functions, what we could fill and how we needed to fill it. The problem that states have is everything they do prior to a federal declaration or federalization, federal funding coming in is paid for by the states, and they don't have that much money. So for us to send a battalion because we think that's the right organization when all they need are some trucks, we need to be able to tailor those packages to meet that requirement initially for the state. Once it becomes federal, it's a little easier, and that transition is something I think we need to think about and work on within the states, and then when it becomes regional, it's going to become really important. But so those mission-ready packages are reviewed every year in the state's all hazards plan. I know a lot of states are going to that now, so that things kind of change. One thing that was added in Texas a few years ago, and this gets to General Honore's trying to insert MDO. I got it for you, sir. Because we had cyber defense teams, or the cyber response, what are they called? CR? Anyway, cyber protection teams, CPTs. We got that force structure into the Guard. And so we went to the state and said, we have a capability in case of a cyber attack to do something to support you. And at first they kind of played around with it, weren't sure how that was going to fit into the system. But we got it added into the Mission Ready Package catalog, a cyber defense team or cyber support team to go out in case of a cyber attack on utilities or some other entity, municipalities. Well, sure enough, recently some ransomware attacks occurred on some municipalities in the state of Texas. And because we had those Mission Ready packages already prepared, the state knew what capability was there and was able to employ it to support those municipalities who could have lost a lot of money that they couldn't afford to lose. And so those are that kind of relationship that the Guard has to have with the Division of Emergency Management in a state is absolutely critical. And so that is probably one of the best ways is looking at the state, the National Guard, the state emergency management system and how they do things to understand what's the initial requirement that we're going to need to have within a state. Because sometimes even catastrophic events don't start off as catastrophic events. They're graduated. They start off slow, we do our state response, and they kind of grow. I think it's also absolutely essential, and this gets into General Richardson's capabilities at Army North. It's essential that we understand the things that she and the FEMA regions can provide to the state. One, know who your FEMA region administrator is. Know who your DCO is and who the members of the DCE are. Those are the guys that you're going to be working with side by side in the state operations center as you're executing a response. Who's the federal coordinating official? Get to know that person. So that the first time you meet is not in the state operations center where the governor's looking at you going, okay, who can give me what? Understand each other's capabilities. The uploads that General Richardson has that can go out into the states, we've brought in numerous times representing all of the reserve components, all of the components, but they're reservists, to tell us what the capabilities are that are within the state. Because if you transition to a dual status command, which I had to do, guess what? You own all that stuff, and you got to know what it can do and where it is and how you get it and what it does. And the uploads are a great resource to help you get to that. EMACs. EMACs are Emergency Management Assistant Compacts. Those occur between governors. They're not just military. They're any relationship, any capability from one state to another state that's an agreement from one governor to another governor that says, I'll provide you this if you need it. And they review each other's all hazards response plans and they look at what that is, and then they can execute it, including military capability. I think when we start talking about a catastrophic event, that's going to create some challenges because those governors already have agreements, and once it elevates into a federal declaration and a large-scale federal response, who's going to go tell that governor, whether it's the FEMA administrator or General Richardson as the JFLIC commander? Probably not. I don't think you want that job. Who's going to tell that governor, okay, that EMAC you had, we're going to nullify that, federalize those troops, and we're going to send them over to this state? That's going to be a challenge, a big challenge. And I don't think we've really done anything like a New Madrid or a Cascadia that exercises that and what that looks like. I guess the last thing that we need to be aware of, certainly within the state as we're looking at other capabilities, is what, and the EPLOs can do this with all the non-Guard entities, but what does the SRM cycle look like, Sustainable Readiness Model, deployment cycles look like with the capability in your state? You have to have an understanding, if you're in a leadership position in that state, of who's going where, who's doing what, who's available and who's not. Because you don't want to figure that out when you're sitting there trying to pull resources together to put into the disaster. And then the last thing is transition to a dual status commander. I think it's important to establish within the state with your governor and with your emergency management folks when you think you need it so that you can execute it. In Texas, and we were just, because we're Texas, and we have 24,000 or so people in the Texas Guard, the previous governor couldn't really come up with a reason why he needed to have a standing MOU with the SecDef for dual status commander. And in Hurricane Harvey, as we were looking at how to get more trucks into the impact area, 300 by 100 mile joint area of operations from Rockport to Beaumont and Port Arthur. We were pulling trucks from El Paso and Lubbock, and I talked to the operations director for the governor, Reed Clay, and I said, I think we need to do a dual status command. He said, why do you think that? I said, because there's 100 trucks at Fort Hood, Texas, and somebody's not going to understand why we waited a day and a half to get trucks out of El Paso and Lubbock when we got 100 trucks at Fort Hood. And the light came on and it was instant. Now we get it. And so that was executed that day. Dual status command went into effect that day, and I became the dual status commander that evening. And so we can talk about getting to the other side of the event as we establish a dual status command. But I can tell you, Hurricane Harvey, absolutely, it was done right. General Richardson's predecessor, General Jeff Buchanan, was the J-Fleet commander, had everything lined up, staged, ready to go, and was in my office the next day after I became the dual status commander with all the capabilities ready to go, and we had them staged, ready to go in, fall under our JTF, and we flowed those forces in and then executed the mission pretty well. So 30 days, 18,000 troops, hundreds of thousands of cases of water, hundreds of thousands of meals, I think 18,000 rescues and 20,000 or so evacuations, all went off without any major injuries. So, sir, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good job. General Richardson, would you segue us into the role of the reserves? Some people may not be familiar with the NDA that activates our reserve components, Army Reserve, in the missions, and introduce our representative here today.
That's right, because we're our reserve component counterpart, so Major General Pat Hamilton from the National Guard, and then I also have Brigadier General Jamie Shawley from the Army Reserve, and she's in the front row. And so we can only have so many. As you see, the table is only set for a certain number of people, but it was important for me to have Jamie here too. For the Army Reserve, because we can, as Pat, General Hamilton talked through the importance of at the state level, and also as Damon mentioned too, you know, the state level is very, very important, and our relationships, you talk about relationships, you got to know, and I took advantage of Hurricane Dorian, and we're very thankful that didn't become as bad as it could have been, because it definitely could have done that, but it allowed me the opportunity, since I came in command in July, then to go to Florida as the storm was going up the East Coast, and I came in I had all my command posts out. They were functional. I had my DCOs that were on the integrated in the state EOCs, and right there with their with the region director and with all of their state FEMA folks that they needed to be tied in with. But as I got to meet the National Guard leadership, the governors, and again, all the state folks, as I went into Florida and then Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Also activated was Virginia in this storm, and then we also have personnel that are located at the National Response Center for FEMA in Washington, D.C. So just really tremendous, the effort, the framework, the folks that under FEMA, very seasoned and very experienced in all of this, to be able to work with them. But just see, and General Honoré mentioned it, the unity of effort is just tremendous. It's really not about who gets credit for any of this. It's how we can pool all of our resources, not step on each other's toes, or not try to get ahead, or not try to get credit or notoriety. It's to bring the best possible response that we can to make sure that we minimize, mitigate, and do what we need to do. And that's absolutely critical with our reserve component of the National Guard and the Army Reserve as well. So, but I want to make sure that the audience knows we have an Army Reservist here too. So if you have questions, please ask them for her.
Well, thank you, General. That being said, we're going to shift the format a little bit. I'm going to ask a few questions, then in the last half hour, we'll push the questions to the audience that you might have to get a further, deeper understanding of the operational concept. things never work out many times how you plan it. When Katrina, Rita, and Wilma came, we had the Mississippi Rifles, the biggest unit in the state of Mississippi, was patrolling in Iraq. And the Louisiana Brigade, the Tiger Brigade, 256, was on mission on Route Irish in Iraq. So as the time passed, these units that we have to adjust the plan based on availability of the units. And that was a critical time for our Army. And to see the quickness that General Blum at that time, with EMAX and without EMAX, deployed about 40,000 troops in the Katrina, was a thing of beauty and a magnificent job. Today, people there's expectations, commanders, that in agencies. If the storm hit today, everybody want to see meals everywhere, water everywhere, bridges open, hospitals open. And then we've got the fat chef that's running around, and I don't know how the hell he do it, but the next day he's feeding steaks. They build an expectation. And that's a lot different than what the people on the stage have to deal with, or to see Anderson Cooper show up. Well, if the media is there, where is the military? Where is our people in uniform? And there are big expectations there. So to set the stage for this first question, I'll read it and I'll kick it to this panel here, determine who might want to answer. The formal declaration of an emergency or major disaster signals response from the federal government that are made and manifested in additional resources, capabilities, and capacities being made available under laws and authorities specifically designed for that regulation. What would the declaration of a catastrophic incident signal to the federal government? What would that mean to DOD as a component of that response? And I'll leave it open to who might want to take the first shot at that.
Okay, General, I'll take the first shot. As was mentioned earlier, kind of the critical part of a disaster response is the declaration from the president. The president personally makes those decisions, and if he declares a major disaster, then the FEMA administrator has all the authorities that he needs to be able to put the full weight of the federal government in support of the state and local responders on the ground. So a catastrophic incident is no different. That immediately puts things into action for him to be able to make decisions and get the federal government going. And that, of course, includes the Department of Defense. One of the things that's different for a catastrophic incident, though, is the process normally works starting from the lowest level up. So the defense coordinating officers that General Richardson talked about work for our regions, and they support the states. The requests normally originate from the state, come up, and the defense coordinating officer processes those, and those go back up for sourcing and processing that way. Catastrophic incident, we would start with the top down. So we have, I think it's 42 now prescriptive mission assignments that are big mission assignments that say, I need 200 helicopters, I need X number of troops and high water vehicles. And we can initiate them right away so that we get things moving. But it really starts with me making a phone call to Bob and saying, Bob, this is the big one. I need everything you have. And then we follow up with the paperwork. But as I mentioned, instead of going from the bottom up then, what that creates then is a top-down allocation of forces, and then trying to figure out where they go is the real challenge. So two parts to that. First part, as we kind of mentioned, is, and I think each panelist talked about this in the opening remarks, is most difficult part of a disaster is the assessment phase and trying to figure out what happened. Because they always happen at night, and they always happen where no one is, and the first thing goes out is communications. And it always happens on a weekend. So trying to figure out what happened and make very early decisions about priorities on what goes where is difficult. And then, as General Hamilton mentioned, how then do you coordinate all those efforts with the EMAX that you have, with the National Guard's inherent capabilities that they have in that particular state, the engagement of the Army Reserve, how do you then take all of those assets and figure out how to best prioritize them for what it is you're trying to do? So that comes to the unity of effort thing. So there you go, General, I got you, unity of
That's
effort.
right.
So it's not unity of command, it's all about unity of effort. And how do you coordinate all of those assets? So I think that's the most difficult part of a catastrophic incident, especially in the early going. And then just because you don't hear from somebody doesn't mean they're not in the most need. A big lesson learned for me for Hurricane Sandy was Long Island. Didn't hear from Long Island. Long Island must be good. Well, it didn't hear from Long Island because Long Island was so heavily damaged, they didn't have a way to report. So we're trying to make decisions early on, and they're very difficult. But another authority now that the FEMA administrator has that he did not have back during Hurricane Katrina was the Post-Katrina Reform PCIMRA Management. It's an acronym, PCIMRA. So now he or she has the authority to pre-position assets at our own expense before a disaster happens. So as we were working with Dorian as a most recent example, and General Richardson was talking about her ability to move up the coast and work from state to state, we also had the authorities then to move assets and DOD assets as part of that leapfrog action as we kind of move north. That's a huge difference from what we had before, and the funding that goes along with that is huge, a huge change to the way business functioned prior to that. But really, for the catastrophic incident, trying to identify where the need is, then making a priority for what you have and deconflicting with all the assets you have, that's like, that's like Math 601, and I'm a Math 101 kind of guy.
Yeah, sure. I'll add to that. I think one of the most important things when this happens is it focuses the leadership of the nation on these events immediately in a catastrophic event. And what I mean by that in particular, as General Hamilton pointed out, the first thing that's going to happen is the governor is going to assess what's going on, and we'll start immediate dialogue, the White House with the president, with the governors to really assess what the needs are. And that's important because that provides tremendous focus to the federal government, what we're going to do. And then obviously FEMA as the lead federal agency and DOD in support. It really gets the nation focused, in particular the federal entities, state and local entities, and how we can do this. The most important thing is we've spent a lot of time over the years identifying the critical capabilities that are needed, whether it's a catastrophic event or a major event. And the normal things that we look at, the immediate needs that are there, evacuation, shelter, there's always challenges with power and those kinds of things which shut down hospitals and nursing homes and those kinds of stuff, fuel shortages, and just the ability to get around and open airfields and open ports and those kinds of things. And then as Damon pointed out, there's little communications. The nice thing is that the Department of Defense understands that, and the work that's been done with FEMA to identify the capabilities that will support these areas where the demand is most needed has been pre-identified. And we've translated the civilian capabilities that are needed into military capabilities. That speeds the response tremendously. The other thing, in the past, secretaries have immediately signed off on full authority to provide life-saving and life-sustaining capability. That gives the chairman of the Joint Chiefs the opportunity to source the capabilities across the services. Again, this would be a total force kind of effort. And if you're familiar with the global force management process, that's how we source the capabilities. And having that full authority means the combatant command that is requesting the forces or capabilities immediately has access to that, and that's incredibly helpful and cuts down on the time-consuming piece of this. And the work that again FEMA has done developing the capabilities that we need to provide is incredibly helpful in moving these things forward and much more effective in what we've done in the past. And again, I just hats off to the tremendous organizations, the military capability, but also organizations like DLA and TRANSCOM and the Corps of Engineers that are always postured and ready to respond to this, along with our military folks. And you can't leave installations out of this. Again, our installations play a critical role in these kinds of events. As we've seen in the past, just in the last couple of years with Camp Lejeune and Tyndall and those things, they can be affected too. But in a lot of cases, if they're not affected, once they've taken care of their military members and families, they're a tremendous resource in the local community, working with the National Guard, working with the state capabilities and the local capabilities. And it's all about integrating that ahead of time. And whether it's a no-notice event or something that we can plan for a hurricane, but when we start talking about these large-scale events, it's the ability to rapidly deliver capability to the American people. And a lot of the great work that's been done by the military and our federal partners, state and local partners, the Adjutant General, has really built a network that's going to be very responsive and effective in these kinds of events.
Thank you, sir.
Can I make a comment?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
So in terms of, I wanted to speak to Dorian because, one, it was my first. Tropical Storm Barry was kind of first, but we really didn't have to execute a whole lot on the Title X side. But Dorian was a little bit different. Now, we didn't have to employ a lot. We did a little bit, but we had a lot of stuff ready to go. And that was from the great efforts that we had of the people that we already have embedded, the DCOs, DCEs, EPLOs, given, right there with the leaders at the state level and knowing the local plan and for response and that kind of thing. And then keeping me updated. And then me keeping my force provider, Headquarters Department of the Army, and then also NORTHCOM, aware of what, how the state leaders were thinking, how FEMA National was looking at this, how, at the region, FEMA level, how they were looking at this, and then how we could posture things and put them on a prepare to deploy order, which is more so than maybe what they're already on. And so all of that seemed to work really, really well. I was pleasantly surprised about how well that was already set up and already established. A lot of communication is required, and I would say that with a storm, we're lucky in the fact that we can, I can go up on the NOAA website, I can look, they have great products, and they can tell me what's generating out there, what has the percentage of developing into a low, medium, or a very strong storm in how many days, right? So it tells me my lead time. Since 3 years ago or 2 years ago, 2017, with the Harvey, Irma, Maria, I'm forgetting one, Nate. There were 4 of them. We developed a template at Army North that actually, in terms of capabilities, what we would deploy, decision support template is what we call it in the military, what you would deploy out, D-5 days, 4 days, before the storm hits. For Maria, Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands is the worst case scenario for me and probably for General Semonite as well. So we already know that we're going to be on the ground before the storm hits, most likely if it's like a Cat 4 or Cat 5 hurricane. And so we don't have to try to fight our way in there just to get there. We're already on the ground and we can start operating immediately. I would say also what has helped in the process too is DOD in the DISCA X order designating NORTHCOM as the DOD synchronizer for DISCA. And I think that helps bring everybody to the table so we don't have any outliers and concerns, that it's just all about the, not being late to need and having what's needed there when it needs to be. For Dorian in particular, I had Title X forces, 804 personnel that were actually out in what we would call the JOA, the Joint Area of Operations, right? They were out there already in place and they were working. I had about 35 units, about 5,000 personnel and equipment on a 24-hour to 48-hour ready to deploy. All we had to do was launch them, right? Give them the order to move. What you don't want to do is you want to have that ready, but not being in anybody's face when they're trying to handle the emergency, right? So that's why it's critical for my personnel on the Title X side is just to get ready and have all those indicators and warnings from all my people that are already out and with the state level leaders, and dialing into the FEMA national call every day, and having that sense of awareness, and then being able to posture up as needed and get things ready as required, knowing what the governor's priorities are. Debris removal, okay, I got an engineer battalion ready to go, and then you want to have it close by so they're not like coming from, I don't know, JBLM to go to to go to Texas, right? They got to travel halfway across the United States on HETs or, whatever, line haul them. So all those kinds of things that you got to work very, very closely with the force provider and like with the Army headquarters or whatever headquarters you're going to get that capability from. I'll tell you, as we transition to the foreign disaster response to the Bahamas and working with NORTHCOM and all the different service components, that was really a tremendous opportunity to see the joint force in all its full power, I would say, not just glory, but power, to see how seamlessly that operation and how the different capabilities come to bear to help out. Obviously, we're normally not in the lead. We're always generally in support when you're talking about homeland security type events. We're always in support of the lead federal agency. So we never want to take the lead, so we want to always enable that operation.
Thank you, General. Well stated. A reinforcing point there in the poll, you said the first rule of warfare, you got to get there. And deployment does not equal employment, because the next day people want to see you, they need you, but you got to close that time and space. And my hat's off to what General Richardson just said, because there was a point in time, believe it or not, in the wisdom of the Pentagon, we wouldn't go nowhere until after the event. And now we see the need, we've had the experience, and to lean forward, and that's making a big difference in saving lives. I'd like to go to another question here, if you would please. Are there plans that have been prepared for the military's projected response to a catastrophic incident? And can you describe them, giving the military deliberate and subordinated status to the civil authorities? And how might we expect these plans to be initiated in order to maximize the unity of effort between the military and the civil components that we support?
You want to start? You want me to go?
Well, first of all, there are deliberate plans that have been established, and NORTHCOM and PACOM, we can't forget PACOM, because they have geographic responsibilities, obviously, for Hawaii and the territories out in the Pacific. Both combatant commands have established deliberate plans for DISCA, obviously Homeland Defense, and some other unique responsibilities they have. They've worked very closely in the development of those plans with state-level adjutants general, working to identify the kinds of gaps that we'd see at that level, also working very closely with our federal partners to understand that. It's one of the first places in the Defense Department where we've actually shared plans with our federal partners ahead of time and in development. FEMA, over the years, has been involved in the development of our deliberate plans at that level, and then, of course, the component plans that go below that, but I'll turn that over, obviously, to you. The guy in the tie shouldn't be talking about planning, but anyways, we should do planning, and we should integrate our planning, but the guy in the tie doesn't do planning.
So we do planning, obviously. There are the family of plans that exists, and the 3500 is really the one that for the DISCA and everything, and then we have the CJCS DISCA X order as well as the CBURN X order. And so we definitely have those on the shelf, and not on the shelf anymore. They're like ready to go all the time, which is good. And so you've got to have that, and you have to have those ready to go. In terms of the planners and that kind of thing, if I need to augment, I talked about the DCOs, my DCEs. You know, the DCO is one person, the DCE is a total of 10. And then you have the EPLOs, and we got REPLOs, and those are worth their weight in gold as well, that are there with the state and work with them each and every day too. So, but if I need to augment for planning purposes, I will definitely do that from Army North and put them out where I need to. I have as I talked about, my deployable command posts as well that go out and then co-locate with state EOCs, or I had one in this last one. We had 3 that were out. I had them at Camp Blanding, Florida. I have my DCE element at Tallahassee at the state EOC. I had another element that was there in the state EOC with Georgia. And then we moved out another element to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, to be postured, for the Carolinas and that response. As we've seen with the Carolinas, it'll move across the coast and just kind of hang out around Fort Bragg and rain and do all kinds of stuff. So, but you want to be, you don't want to be late to need when you're executing. And then you don't want to chase the storm too, right? So there's patience. There's a lot of things that you got to exercise with. Okay, you don't want to react too fast. It's just a balance and a lot of the indicators, and as you watch as things are happening. As I talked about with the storm, you have a little bit, you've got some warning. With other type activities, you may not have any warning, right? And you may be reacting to contact, and that's when all of that planning, the exercises that we do, which is a lot of exercises at the DoD level with FEMA and other federal agencies, down to the state level exercises that we do, and all the exercises that we do with our reserve component. Very, very important, obviously. And they're not easy. I mean, they stress you out in terms of throwing all the curveballs at you to figure out handling multiple situations at the same time. So, but definitely we scale as required for the planning that's required and that sort of thing.
So at FEMA, we have a nest of plans that are all synchronized with the regions, and then the regions synchronizing with the states. We have 6 catastrophic plans for 6 different catastrophic incidents that we update 2 a year, and that's how we do the rotation. Critical part of that is NORTHCOM and their participation in helping us get things aligned. And we made the same mistake that people make when they originally do plans, and we had very large plans that nobody used. But we've since adopted a process where we really have a take-apart plan, and you can take away the pieces that pertain to you and use them a lot better. So one of the things we try to do is describe what the critical assets are in a particular region or a particular state or particular area that may be hit in a catastrophic incident, so that we know what the most important parts that they need to be restored, or most important parts to look at are. And I think we've come a long way with that. But I think the biggest single advancement that we made in the past few years working with NORTHCOM is the integration of Transportation Command, TRANSCOM, and the feasibility studies. So, everybody makes a big plan that talks about moving a lot of stuff, but how much stuff can you actually move? So when we go back to TRANSCOM and then we give them what our requirements are, and then they come back and tell us what reality says we can actually move, then we adjust the plan and set priorities that way. So we have all those decisions made before we get started. And in one case, in one of our plans, TRANSCOM said, if you had 2 less intermediate staging bases, you could actually process more things than you could with the current plan that you have. So I think we've come a long way along those lines. But think about that and the other 64 departments and agencies that are in our government that all have a part of that, and what kind of information that you have to provide.
Well, thank you very much. We've got a couple more questions here before we go to individual. And this next one, General Semonite, if you would take the lead on it, if you don't mind. Can you identify constraints and restrictions beyond resources that would currently impede our preparation for responding to a catastrophic incident? Would you take the lead, please?
So, sir, there's, I think the biggest single challenge we have is not necessarily laws and authorities that maybe are too hard to overcome. It's that many times well-intentioned good people don't understand those authorities. And so when you think about the rules, we have a lot of rules, and probably the biggest single area we get in challenges with is use of funds. Everybody's got to understand it. If you're a soldier out here, you think about ROE on the battlefield. How do you continue to follow the rules and be able to do the right thing? So if we're out doing stuff and all of a sudden you are a compassionate soldier and you see somebody that needs help, you'd think, well, I'm just going to go and give them some help and do it. And it depends on, are you working under General Richardson's authorities? Are you working under a FEMA mission assignment? What are those? A great example I'll give you is in Sandy. Sandy, we ended up having a couple big refineries that got hit really hard in the storm. So fuel was a nightmare. And all of a sudden we had big public facilities that needed fuel. Think of things like nursing homes or hospitals to be able to have fuel go there. So I think, Damon, what happened is we got a mission assignment in to say we want DOD fuel tankers to go out and to be able to supply DOD fuel to those facilities. So the guy driving the Hemet, he thinks, he knows where he's got to go, and he drives down to the hospital and he fills up whatever he's got to fill up. It got to the point where the gas lines, though, were so long for people to get gas, and they're trying to get their problems, that there was, hundreds of cars in line for a gas station to be able to get gas. So now the Hemet driver's driving down, and somebody pulls them aside and says, hey, can you fill me up? You're filling up the private hospital. Can you do this? And that's where we've got to be able to make sure we stay in our lane. Now, initially, the answer was we're only going to give fuel to public entities and not the private entities. But then it got to the point where at some point we got the go-ahead to actually park a Hemet fueler at a gas station, and cars came by and we gave them gas. So it goes back to we're compassionate soldiers, we want to do the right thing, but you just got to be able to make sure you kind of stay in your lane to be able to understand, how those ROAs go out. And there's a whole business part of this that you don't need to know about, but it goes back to at some point, if DOD does something, DOD is big enough where they can probably absorb leaning forward. But there's other times where, you got to make sure that we aren't giving exposure back to the federal government somewhere where we're doing something that our heart might say we ought to do, but it's just tough. Real estate's a good example. If somebody wants a blue roof, says, hey, I forgot to fill the form out. You're doing blue roofs. You did house number 2, house number 3. Can you come do house number 4? Well, you actually have to have permission to walk onto somebody's private property to do a blue roof, and it's got to actually be signed in a form. Nobody wants to hear that in the middle of a storm, but there is some litigation. So this is where know the rules, stay in your lane. And I got to admit, and I love FEMA, but I tell you what, these guys lean forward something wicked. And if there's ever even a chance that somebody needs help, they will be the ones that sign on the line, even if it means that maybe you're going to go down and do something, maybe it's not needed. But you talk about an organization that is extremely aggressive in taking risk and doing the right things for the right reason. My hat's off to FEMA. So, Bob, I don't know whether you want to add any more to that, but I think that's probably the biggest single pitfall we have.
No, I agree with you completely on FEMA and the relationship that we have with the other departments and agencies. And I would point out, as you just did with the fuel issue, the department does get involved in a number of issues that you wouldn't normally think of the Department of Defense being involved in when it comes to these disasters. It fundamentally comes back to we have the capabilities, and because we have the capabilities, there's great expectations at very senior levels in the government. And having worked for probably the last 10 secretaries, I can tell you when it comes to disasters and emergencies, the president looks to FEMA to lead them, but looks to DOD then to be responsive with its capabilities. And we will do a lot of things to help out, and we always find the way. The nice thing about the Defense Department, I think in OSD we've got about 500 lawyers, and we can always find a way to get things done. So it works out that way. Thanks.
Thank you. If you would, I'd like to go to our last question. The core competency of deliberate planning may be the greatest asset the military has in preparing for and responding to complex catastrophic events. How can that competency be leveraged from other government functions and agencies to ensure unity of effort while preparing for and responding to catastrophic incident? General, you want to take the lead?
Yes, sir. Well, I think Mr. Penn talked about it. We've come a long way in our ability to plan for really a campaign type of a planning event for the major catastrophic events. The core competency in the military of being able to do deliberate planning is already taking place within the states and the integration with the all hazards plan that the state do. I mean, I've seen it across the states that I visited in my previous job. They really are getting after it because the planners within the military within that state are helping out. Army North has also been absolutely amazing in training their DCOs and their DCEs to get involved with the state plans, help them develop those state response plans. So the next step, as we have a full understanding of the state plans and how DOD can support within a state the all hazards response requirements of getting to a regional complex catastrophe. How many people in here know the specifics of what will happen if New Madrid goes, the seismic, New Madrid seismic? Not very many. So the last time it went was a little over 100 years ago, and when it went, the Mississippi River flowed backwards for about 6 days. Every line of communication across the Mississippi River will come down. The impacted number of states, I think, is, I don't know, Mr. Penn, you probably have the more specific on that. It's several states directly impacted. St. Louis will be severely impacted. And the commodities that flow across the Mississippi River to the east, including food and fuel and other things, is going to go away. That is a complex catastrophe. That's going to involve all of us. And so I think as we graduate from where we are now, and we're at the state, we're pretty good at dealing with maybe the state-specific federal agency response to a catastrophe within a state or two states. You know, Sandy was, well, you can put the whole eastern seaboard in Texas, but Sandy was a few states. But I think as we start really looking at the capabilities we have to do large-scale planning, that's where I think the competencies of the military working with FEMA, because I think there's 4 FEMA regions involved in New Madrid, all tied together. That's where I think the next step of that core competency of DOD working with FEMA and with the states can come in developing a comprehensive campaign plan for a complex disaster.
Very good. General Richardson, would you like to add anything to that comment since you did your tour of the southeast there with this hurricanes?
No, I think Patrick answered it good enough. Like I said, we have folks that we embed and can augment at any time, and the exercises are huge and and very critical to all of the agencies that participate, and what it takes in a New Madrid scenario would really open your eyes when you see how many different agencies are involved, and at the state and local level to handle something like that, as well as the federal level.
Well, thank you. We have about 25 minutes left of our panel, and now we get to the exciting part where you as members of the audience get to participate by challenging the panel here with questions. So who will be the first person like to ask a question, please?
Sir.
Yes, sir.
Right here. Jeff Holmes, Tagga, Tennessee.
Hey, Jeff.
Thank you for the panelists. Great discussion. My question is specific to incidental use of DOD equipment and support of our citizenry. You know, there are certain types of units, as we know, that performing their MTO&E mission are very adaptable to supporting things like, you know, medevac and flying helicopters, things of that nature. Sometimes it feels like we're getting more restrictive on the ability to use those assets, and with the intent of letting the local entity deal with the disaster as much as practicable. Sometimes they can get through it with a little help. But do you see that as being more stringent or continuing on a kind of current pace? That was my question. The more restricted, you feel like it's getting more restrictive of using incidental use authorities to use military assets in support of local disasters?
My view, I don't think it's getting more restrictive. I think the rules have always been there. as you know, as the Adjutant General for Tennessee, there's certain policies that are out there, laws. You know, you have the ability for the state to use certain capabilities, but it's always been that those capabilities, there was a reimbursement, you know, through the PFO. And so those rules have existed. I don't know if you're talking about a specific issue or I think there's an opportunity when you're out there training to provide support. There's immediate response authority too that's out there. So it's a combination of authorities. We'd have to look at the specific ones as it relates to the specific issue. But I don't think the Defense Department, what the Defense Department does want to do is use the established processes that do exist, whether that's EMAC or the mission assignment process, especially as it comes to disasters, because there's a benefit to doing that for a lot of reasons, both in EMAC and both in the mission assignment process. They're reimbursed, so there's a funding issue there. But also the question becomes, are we using training to respond to incidents rather than using those processes? Is it a single event kind of thing? What we've seen is obviously across the board is employing training as a response to a natural disaster when those other opportunities exist, both at the state level and the federal level. And so right now we're working on that particular issue to examine, you know, how much of that goes on, when it goes on, and then obviously, you know, there is a difference between a state activity and a federal, specifically a DoD responsibility. It's important, as I spoke before in the beginning, it's a federalist system, and that federalist system has different authorities and different responsibilities to deal with.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. I'm glad to talk more about it, but we can do that later if you'd like to.
Anyone else like to add to that? That's one that comes up quite often. Are they still restricted by the Economy Act?
Well,
their restriction, would you talk to that a little bit? Because
sure.
Folks,
I mean, there's lots of authorities, right? The Economy Act is really designed for federal departments to federal departments. The Economy Act is when, for example, we get a request. It could be a request from another department, any department, asking for DoD support. If we're asked for that support, by law, it's reimbursable. We're appropriated to do DoD missions specifically, and so somebody is asking us for support to do their mission. The Economy Act is the law and the guidance that provides that we'd be reimbursed. But as it relates to disasters, I think it's different, you know, yeah. And Damon's the expert here, but we have the Stafford Act, right? And the Stafford Act is established so that when a state, in particular when the governor determines that the state capabilities are exceeded, that he needs assistance from the federal government, then he obviously provides that declaration to FEMA and the president requesting support. It can be a major declaration or emergency declaration, depends on the size and scope, and if you go through the Stafford Act. But the great thing about that is what that does is it begins to flow federal support. And specifically, it's a burden sharing issue too, because we do that obviously to ensure that the state maintains some level of engagement in the effort. So normally it's a 75-25% split, and the 25% is the state responsibility, the 75% is the federal government. Just to give you an example, though, and again, Damon's the expert, so I don't want to keep talking here, but the number of disasters that have had declarations over the last 20 years is incredible. And so the federal government has, through the DERF, which is the Disaster Response Fund, provides that funding, and it's pretty significant amount of funding that is made available every year. I think one of the goals that FEMA has had over the years is to ensure that the states, again, it comes back to preparedness, comes back to the federalist system, and who ultimately has responsibility to the citizens of the state. And when the federal government is needed, we have the Stafford Act that allows us to do that.
And we'll go to the gentleman on the right. I think you were next.
Yes, sir. Christopher Haney, Homeland Security, Remote Sensing Advisor. I want to connect a dot on a couple things that were said. Damon Penn mentioned, like Long Island at Sandy, didn't know they had the need because comms were down. A substitute for comms is situational awareness. Situational awareness, particularly exquisite, not just the lay of the land, the terrain, and the waterways, but down to the granular human level. For lines of communication, are they obstructed? Are you going to need heavy equipment to clear the obstruction? Is a bridge out? That situational awareness, to me, in military terms, sounds like a force enabler or a disaster response aid enabler, but it's not clear to me that we're requesting the right amount, the right type, quick enough that would be useful to the most levels of government. So I throw out, part of the question is, would exquisite situational awareness, rapidly collected and made available in an address searchable portal, help the entire response of FEMA, Army Corps, and the Guard in getting the people, the equipment, and the aid material in? And one example of this would be, instead of an NGB aircraft or a P-8 or something doing an oblique shot, flying around looking at something, comprehensive area collection, geo-registered, map-ready, mission-ready, vertical and 4-axis oblique, so you can see the roof and all 4 sides of any structure or any road, line of communication or critical infrastructure in the area. Done within a week, 3-inch color, done within a week in an address searchable portal. Would such a capability enable streamlined response in a way that's a bit more beneficial for these larger scale disasters like Harvey in Houston or Maria in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so good question. So, yeah, situational awareness is at the center point of trying to figure out what the response is going to be. But to be honest with you, I can't wait a week. I have to know in time then, if we task DOD as an example, then I've still got them to go through the approval process. They got to generate the forces. They have to alert the forces. They have to put them on the ground, and then they have to move to where we are. And as General Honore mentioned, when we talk about managing the expectations, that's really not within the expectations of our citizens. So my challenge, for me anyway, in my job is not getting imagery. My problem is managing imagery. I've got imagery from everywhere. I've got everything a DOD has. I've got every satellite that you can imagine that's available to me. I've got the Civil Air Patrol that we can fly on specific missions that can take pictures of everything that we need to do. We've got geospatial experts that can break down everything that we talked about and do exactly what you said and look at the 4 sides of a house. But what does that tell me about what the need on the ground is? I've got a neighborhood that's flooded out. Did the neighborhood evacuate, or are we doing search and rescue in the neighborhood? If the neighborhood is evacuated and they're in a shelter, then now I've got an issue where I need to provide food and water to the shelter, but not necessarily the search and rescue part. So part of the task is, and General Richardson alluded to this earlier, is having some tactical patience as well. Because you have assets and you're ready to deploy them, and what you have, you got to make sure you send to the right place, because you can't pick them up and move them again in a lot of cases. But trying to figure out what that is and what the right balance is what the challenge is. And you're going to get a lot of that from the states and locals, but there's some processing that has to happen as well. Because if you are right in the middle of a fire, the whole world is on fire. If you're watching a fire on television, somebody's got an issue, but I'll change the channel and watch the ball game. So things are kind of different. But yeah, situation awareness is everything. But my personal challenge is processing all of the data that I already have and not necessarily getting more data.
So let me take a swing at it from 2 other angles. First of all, most of the local officials don't want to necessarily ask for help for there's a lot of the reasons we heard earlier, okay? And they aren't going to ask until they really, really know they got a problem and they're in over their heads. And then by the time they get the state in, and if Mr. Penn gets the notification, we're already way behind. If we knew the issue was there, we would already been leaning forward. So it's a crisis. And then everybody wants us to be there 3 days ago when we just barely get the warning order. So we don't have time to be able to either deploy or whatever else. So again, I'm more in the execution mode. So what we do now, and this is into the PhD level of disaster response, As soon as the storm starts happening, this is intel on the battlefield, okay? I put my public affairs guys all up and down the vertical chain, district, division. Have them watching TV. Okay? That's all I do. They watch all day long because the news crews sometimes are there long before FEMA calls us, okay? And we're watching some lady out there saying, my house is of this or the electricity's out. And social media is invaluable right now. We're watching tweets, we're watching everything coming in, and we're able to figure out where's there a problem. Mr. Penn talked about Long Island. Staten Island was a major problem in Sandy. The way we knew we had a problem in Sandy is a principal finally went on a social media point and said, I have not seen anybody here in 4 days. And all of a sudden, we're like, hey, let's not wait for FEMA to call, get a generator down there, figure it out. We'll back our way into the mission assignment, but we've got some issues out there. So what are we doing to be able to read tweets, social media, and you build the picture backward to a degree to understand what's the intel on the battlefield. And there are times where we'll actually say, you need help, get a mission assignment up, call us. But in the meantime, I'm not waiting to get the paperwork. I've got a guy with a generator on the way down there. And sometimes we're risk adverse. You can't do that in this operation. You got to go down there, and if you waste a little bit of money driving a generator down and the hospital's up by the time you get there, that's okay.
So if I could add one quick comment. There's an entity out there that fights harder for situational understanding on damage assessment than any of us do. It's called insurance companies. And they will have drones in the air right away. Matter of fact, it starts hindering response, and so we have to limit that with the FAA and putting ROSs up and doing things like that. But those guys are fighting real hard for damage assessments. And if we can tap into that someday, that would be kind of cool.
And quick comment on that. There is one of the largest consortiums for insurance is National Insurance Crime Bureau, 1,100 property and casualty companies for homes and autos. I think it's out of Council Bluffs, Iowa. They have a single geospatial intelligence center in Boulder. They want to get up and fly. One of the dilemmas, if it's a big city with international airport and controlled airspace like Houston, is FAA controls the airspace and you need a FEMA mission authorization to get in. And you might have the perfect imagery that both the residents, the local, the city, county government need, but if that FEMA doesn't grant a mission authorization to a commercial or .org entity to service the insurance companies, and they're also providing that to first responders for free, it doesn't happen as quick as it needs to.
Yeah, the
Well,
challenge is
that's
we're
not entirely correct.
Yeah.
Okay, FEMA doesn't decide who gets into the airspace. The FAA makes that decision. We provide guidelines back for what priorities we have for things that are other than the normal commercial flights that need to go in. But I'm not the guy that says who flies and who doesn't.
He's right. It's not. It's the FAA working in our version of a KAOC. But I would tell you the reason that we restricted that during Harvey was because we were doing search and rescue, which is way more important than damage assessment. Cool.
Understood. Thank you.
That was a good run on that question. Ma'am, please.
Good afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Audrey Brown, 46th Military Police Command, C2 Sierra Bravo. My question's directed toward. All right. My question's directed toward General Summonite. You talked about debris removal, and I'm just curious at what point does it transition to a recovery phase? Because debris removal, there's a certain amount of local business and business that helps stimulate economy and recovery phase. And I was just curious as to at what point does it transition into that recovery phase where some of that rebuilding and some of those funds would go toward the economy.
So debris removal, I think what we've worked here, and it's all of us on the panel probably have been, we're much more agile than it used to be. We want to be flexible to what the local entities want. We have massive contracts with capabilities. Every single city in America is under a debris removal contract right now. So if something happens, those guys are ready to go in. Our teams are ready there. A lot of the states, though, and the local entities like to do it themselves, okay? And I'll be honest, they might be able to then hire their contractors versus our contractors. There could be a scenario where our contractors from state X and we're over in state Y, and they want to be able to make sure all the income's going into their state. So long before we get the mission assignment, that dialogue is worked at the lower levels, and then they figure out, and sometimes it's the entire state wants to do it. This is another area where we've seen in the past is the local entities say we're going to sign up and do it. and all of a sudden, 30 days later, trash is still on the front lawns because the contractors get protests and it's not out there, and so then we come back in. But we normally take the lead from Mr. Penn as to what's that architecture, how do we want to do it? And it does get tricky because at some point when you're thinking about response, where's the debris? You've got to get out of there right away. What we normally do is we immediately haul it off the property line, and there's even times like we did this in Virgin Islands, you're on an island. It's hard to get rid of it all. So we worked, I think, for 2 years to be able to get rid of all the tree debris. We haul it out in the middle of the back 40 somewhere. We'll rent a great big lot, put all the trees out there, and then over a period of 2 or 3 years, we'll continue to get rid of it. So it kind of stretches from recovery into response to long-term repair. Damon, I don't know if you want to add any more to that.
Yeah, you're right. And the biggest single challenge for debris removal, strangely enough, is being granted access. And General Simonite and his folks work through this every day. You would think that this would be easy, but it's not. And then what can you remove from private property? What can you remove from public property? What type of debris is it? It's huge.
But there's a real success story here. I'm just going to give you a real short story. The California wildfires. There was a city over there that it did burn down 1,000 houses. We were asked to come in and basically to remove, not necessarily the foundations, but all of the debris, take all of the stuff out. So if the car's all burned up, I mean, there's hazardous waste issues. How do you deal with that? So cars go one place and all the other stuff goes away. There was a lady who had her husband passed away, and he was cremated, and he was on the fireplace, right over the fireplace of her house, okay? And the house burned down. And so when we came back in, she said, I would give anything just to have a part of my husband back. How do we do this? So there we went out, and this is kind of an unusual one, went out and found there's actually a dog that you can hire that knows the difference between human ashes and, you know, the ashes from a house. And so we went in and very, very carefully collected. I'm not sure we were 100% accurate, but we were in 80% ballpark probably, and gave that lady back what we felt was her husband. And that's the compassion that you have to have, but that costs a little bit extra. And we, as the federal government, the state government, can't just say, "Hey, no way, we don't do ashes for cremated people." No, you got to be compassionate because at the end of the day, we're here to be able to take care of, and that's what DoD does, what FEMA does well. It's all about taking care of the American people.
Good question.
Thank you.
And over here, sir.
Hey, good afternoon. Check. There we go. So my name is Robert Ford. I'm with Guardian Centers down in Perry, Georgia. First off, thank you to the panelists. Intimidating level of experience up on that stage and the disasters you've all led us through, I appreciate. What I would like to ask about is about training and preparedness for our state and local responders. So we've all, and I heard many of you today talk about planning, training, and exercises on the front side, left of the boom, as an old EOD guy myself. So what do you see in the future for state and local responders as our threat evolves and becomes more complex and as stakeholders in the overall response together? What do you see for funding for that? Because that's one of the challenges we see across in our space to where state and local folks have a hard time, especially if you're not in large metropolitan cities. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll try to tackle part of that. First of all, our first responders do a miraculous job. The kinds of things that they do on a day-to-day basis just would baffle you if you had a good understanding of that, let alone what they do when we have a disaster. But you're right, there is a gap between training and what they do for individual responses versus what they do for citywide, county-wide responses. And it kind of depends on the state. There is some grant money that's available, but a lot of it gets used for other things. And it's really hard when you're the guy on the ground and you're the state guy and you're trying to figure out where to spend your grant money, whether you spend it on something that's already happened or spend it on something that might happen. But what we've managed to do over the past 4 or 5 years, and the states have taken the lead on this, is do a much better job of outlining what their shortfalls are and where they think they're going to need help, and identifying those training gaps that they have. There's several training centers around the world, around the nation, that you can do some collective training. There's one in West Virginia I can think of off the top of my head. General Hamilton, where's the one in that place I can never pronounced Muscatatuck?
Muscatatuck.
Okay.
That's the name, man.
Yeah, so it exists, but it's very difficult for them to get there and do what they need to do. The success story in all of this, though, I think, is the Urban Search and Rescue Program. So with that, we've got 26 full-time teams that remain trained, and we deploy them throughout the United States to react. Several of them also have international requirements and international agreements. Locally here at Fairfax County, as an example, they went to the Bahamas, they went to Haiti, they've gone to several places internationally. Those teams get some augmentation from us, but they spend more than we augment them just to maintain the readiness that they need to maintain. And there's a tremendous competition to become one of those teams, which also builds a deeper bench for us. So I think if we can use that as a model, to your point, I think we'd get better overall as a nation, but really difficult decisions to make.
We have a couple more questions. We got about 5 minutes, panel, if you would. I'd like to defer to those two questions and come back to you for closing comments. Ma'am, on the right, please.
Hi, Susan Green, Cass, Ohio. My question is, to what extent is there pre-disaster event planning, coordination, and communication with NGOs such as the American Red Cross, national church organizations, and resource-rich corporations for response and recovery unity of effort?
Great question. I'll start. I hate to hog the mic, but great question. So in our National Response Coordination Center, we've got 122 seats where we manage the federal response. A third of those are for, or 2/3 of those rather, are for our federal partners and our non-government organizations. So Red Cross has a seat there. Several other, I think there are 14 other NGOs that have a seat, and they come to us and every time we activate, and that's where they start. So they are critical of what we do, and they're an integral part of what we do. What we've done as part of the new National Response Framework that will be released hopefully in a few weeks, you'll see the addition of a ESF 14, which includes a much better part of inclusion for our civilian counterparts and our NGOs than we had before. So where we had one person that would make a call and talk to industry over the course of a day and normally just get a weather update, now we've got a team that does that full time, and when you see the National Response Framework, I think you'll be impressed with how we've really laid that out and how much involvement that we have through all levels. So that's a great question. That's a deficiency we've had for quite a while, but I think we're on the right track to getting it corrected. But all of those entities that you mentioned as an example are what we count on to do feeding. So you think when we move 1 million meals ready to eat and 1 million bottles of water that's going to take care of something? That's just the tip of the iceberg. Those organizations that you mentioned are the ones that do long-term feeding, and and at the state and local level, they all have relationships with the shelters. I went to a mega shelter in Texas here a few months ago, and integral to what they were doing was the built-in feeding that they had from several local organizations that not only brought the food and the equipment, but they also brought other wraparound services like child care, and it was just an incredible thing to see.
Thank you, Damon. We have one additional question. This will be the last question from the audience before we go to some closing comments. Sir, your question, please. I'm
Major General retired Al Aycock. Several of you on the panel have discussed how important military installations are to support your operations. Would you please comment on the readiness need for installations down to armory and reserve centers to have resilient power such as microgrids and generators to power command and control facilities to support operations? And for you, General Henry, this would enhance your unity of effort, your mission command, and to set the path for multi-domain catastrophe operations.
He's getting the best question, isn't he? I'll defer to the commanders here on that question on readiness of our centers.
Okay, so I think in terms of our installations, I think we could do better with our installations. Also with our mobilization force generation installations, our MFTIs as well, and having those ready for the Guard and Reserve as we're executing possibly an O plan as well, and having those ready to go. Having the redundant systems that are necessary, there are some in place, but again, there's always improvement that needs to be made. And I would say that as we're also, particularly in the Army, we're modernizing. We have our 6 modernization priorities. We've got, I mean, that's clearly the priority, and that's readiness for our Army. But we also know that keeping up our infrastructure is very hard to do, and so I think there's always ways to improve on that for the reasons that you've stated. But I think over time we've realized the necessity for that and that sort of thing, and that has been happening. But again, there's always improvements that we can make.
Well, thank you. General Simonite, we'll go to you next with a 1-minute wrap-up, and then we'll go in turn to all the members. Thank you.
Just real quick, sir, just down that, the last several years we have done a lot more on resiliency, though. It's not just for disaster response, but we're also worried about threat. That if these installations are so dependent on the civilian entity to be able to provide utilities, we could actually lose a lot of our capability, but it's a great question. I would just say, and I know we're going to be close on time, one thing we haven't talked about, I continue to talk about this intel piece and our ability to not have blind spots in these storms. And so a lot of times the local people call back up. I use a term that we use in the military an awful lot. Every soldier is a sensor. You got to go out and you got to see what's going on. So we had a bunch of engineers out cutting trees off of roads doing a route clearance mission in these hurricanes. And if they go by a hospital and there's no electricity and it's in the middle of the night, then write that down and come back and tell us. Or if all of a sudden you see a washout on the side of the road or you see something else. So you got to be able to have our teams that are out there that are very, very good. And it's the whole team, the federal team, but bring it back and let people know, because sometimes they're focused in their lane. Am I only out to do this particular mission? They'll drive right by things that we've got to be able to have an intel on, and we just don't see it. So let everybody know that's out working. Continue to be able to ask questions, knock on doors, and figure out how do we have a good understanding of that requirement early on. I'll stop there, sir.
Okay, Mr. Penn.
Yeah, so just thanks for having me, first of all. And then I can tell you that our federal preparedness and our ability to respond as a federal government has never been stronger. And our partnership with DOD has never been greater than it is. And that's what gives us the opportunity now to think about the unthinkable and think about catastrophic incidents. So I know we had a lot of negative things, but those are things that we can work on now that are graduate level work, because we are working very hard and we're doing the things day to day that we need to do.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Slits.
Yeah, my only comment is the number one objective in the National Defense Strategy that was written 2 years ago is the protection of the homeland and the ability to respond to catastrophic events. I can think of no more higher strategic guidance that we have. But to boil it down to something more practical, I think the fundamentals are sustained partnerships, having good information sharing networks so that we can move information quickly, pre-identifying capabilities and having pre-arranged agreements, not at the last minute, but doing that ahead of time, and making investments in preparedness, from the individual to the organization to what we do in planning and training. And it incorporates everybody. It's not just the Defense Department, it's just not FEMA. It's what we do in our communities at the local level, at the state level, across the federal departments and agencies, to the individual families. And so with that, thank you again, and thank you for your service to our country. I appreciate that.
Okay. General Hamilton, then we'll go to General Richardson Les.
So I think that we've come a remarkable distance in our ability as DOD to respond to incidents within the states and across the country. During Hurricane Katrina, Rita, I guess, Jack Colley, the old emergency management director in Texas, General Clark from Fifth Army decided he was going to go to the State Operations Center and bring capabilities and everything else with him. And when he got there, Jack Colley said, "General, we didn't ask for you. We don't want you. Go back to Fort Sam and keep on that installation until we ask for you." We've now progressed to the point where Fifth Army, General Richardson, as the JFLIC commander, we've established a process for bringing in Title X capability to support the states in conjunction with the National Guard as a total force to really be able to respond. And I think what we did during the 17 storm season was the execution of what was a result of things that happened in Katrina that General Honore had to deal with. And so we've come a remarkable distance. I just think we need to keep continuing to move in that direction.
And our host commander, would you give us a wrap here, General Richardson?
I sure will. And I want to thank all the great folks that came to this panel today to discuss this very important topic. And thank you, General Honore, as well, for being our moderator. As you can see, this is a great team to be able to work with and be colleagues with, and that are at the highest levels, and the decisions that they're making, and how you got a little bit of an insight into how they think and how they operate as well, and their priorities. And I think that that's just really tremendous, and very honored to be able to work with them. And again, at the end of the day, it's all about relationships and the unity of effort and bringing everything to bear to counter what occurs in our homeland. And there could be no greater opportunity or challenge or more heroic thing to be able to do for our nation, and do it in the homeland. And so thank you again for coming out today. I certainly appreciate it, and have a great day. Cool.
All right, how about a big round of applause for them? Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Courtesy grab.